Well, welcome sales associates, aspiring sales professionals, and of course, anyone that's in the real estate space that's looking to conquer, in particular, the art of foothold of breaking into or reinvigorating a real estate market to the point that they can build a platform to take a 30% market share. Today, we're in what will be session numero 10. So we're 10 into the new series. This will constantly change its face as we go. A good, I guess, starting point for what's common inside the real estate space. And our subject matter today is we're talking about routine. Routine being the habits that you create. And to me, they need to be created in and around what I refer to as prioritization. You know, I see lots of real estate sales associates looking to break into the market, and we pay a lot of lip service to the ideal of procuring sellers. And I know that in some markets at the moment, a lot of agents are saying that, you know, sellers are being a bit reluctant. We addressed this in our last session. We were talking about all of the angles that you can use to run consultation rather than just sitting back and looking to be a valuer running appraisals. I mean, to me, the consultation, advice rather than price, is tantamount to actually presenting something of value to any prospective seller. And that really takes precedence over anything that you might be wanting to say or do. So much so, and I can even just allude to this when we talk about, you know, every facet of everything that you put in place, it needs to have as its primary objective the ongoing, procurement of active property sellers. And we've spent a lot of time talking about, talking to prospective property owners and just trying to ascertain where they're at inside the move. You'll know that the goal of foothold has always been around presence. And presence is the key to actually falling onto the shopping list, not least of which even around that. So we've got a lot of companies at the moment that are going through, they're in areas, particularly in Australia, where we're in lockdown, and then that lockdown has been rather protracted. And they're sitting back and they're saying, oh, well, we just got to wait for that lockdown to clear. Well, I couldn't disagree more. I actually reckon that this presents a remarkable opportunity, especially for someone who is still thinking about this in a routine functional disposition. If you're writing something down, if you are taking notes, I want to talk about routine, because to my mind, routines are directly linked to habits. There's a habit that I'm actually in the middle of formulating right now. And I will say this, don't look at what you've done prior to us having this conversation now, prior to us talking about your routine behavior, and look at some things you're doing and start saying, I've got to change that. I've got to begin some new habit that you might be, because of the way you're feeling, talking about bringing that into play, but there's little chance of you actually doing it because, something's going to get in the way the moment you start. You might go a couple of days. I'm sure you've all experienced this, where you go into place. I mean, I know for some people who give up smoking, and one of the things that, surprise, surprise, the old fanatic, I'm still a smoker. And people say this to me all the time. They say, but I've never seen you have a cigarette. I said, yeah, but I've just been having a rest from it for about the last 15 years. And they said, wow, how do you manage and maintain that? I said, I used to talk about giving up smoking, and it just never worked out, not least of which was marred by the fact that, other smokers, they don't want you to leave. So they're always offering them to you. And of course, if you don't really want to give it up, if you actually sit back and say, well, I like the habit of smoking, there's very little chance of you taking up or warming to the idea of quitting. As I jokingly say to people all the time, you know, they say, why would you never give up smoking? I say, well, I'm not a quitter. I've never quit anything in my life. So rather than quitting smoking, I actually took up not smoking. As crazy as this sounds, the moment I was prepared to admit to myself that I'm not a smoker, that I am a smoker, whoops, the moment I was prepared to make that admission, the ability to give it up came into play because I wasn't depriving myself of anything. And this leads me to actually saying to you that, you know, you cannot break a habit. You can only overwrite that habit with a new one. So in the formulation of a routine, it's not for us to sit back and try to figure out how we overcome the things that we're not doing or install things that we're not doing, rather to look at how we can override those things that we are doing and formulate a new habit. Many of you would know when I talk about this, and even with the formulation of creating a routine, you just need to look at the components that are essential. Yeah. And I've said this on a number of occasions. And again, I hope that you're writing this down. Whatever you focus on grows. So for me, coming back to that smoking habit, it was rather simple. Those other people that were continuing to smoke and didn't like the idea of me leaving the habit, they would invariably offer me a cigarette. And rather than me announcing to them that I was quitting smoking, which I didn't feel good about, and them being aware of it, and them thinking, oh, maybe what am I going to do to get them in? Because what they do is they go, just one, just another. Was instead, I just said, whenever I was offered a cigarette, I would say, no, not now, maybe later, or not at the moment, that sort of thing. And then after a while, people started offering me, stopped offering to me at all. And what I was doing, I was taking up the habit of not smoking. Does this mean that I'm no longer a smoker? No, it doesn't. Once a smoker, always a smoker. And I feel quite liberated around that because I'm not telling myself what I cannot do. But in turn, I've become habitually clear about what I do want to do. So when then there was this second admission, I'll stick away from the smoking. For those of you that have never smoked, you're probably thinking, well, what's that got to do with real estate? It's got a lot to do with real estate. Fascinating, I know. See, because the next admission I made to myself a long time ago was that I was naturally lazy. You know, people would always be telling me that success was reserved for those who are prepared to work hard and hustle and grind. And I couldn't see a lot of evidence around that, aside from a very few select people that were prepared to work inordinate hours, I mean, ridiculous hours, and irrespective of the productivity numbers they were making, fully believing by just turning up and investing all those hours, there was going to be a breakthrough. And this just never made sense to me. Like, they would talk about prospecting, which I know that we've all talked about, and they would say, what you need to do is just get out there and talk to as many people as you can, irrespective of whether or not you could identify that they were actually doing something now and they were receptive to talking to a real estate agent. Just talk to them by virtue of the fact that their property is located in your service area. This, I've got to tell you folks, is a total nonsense. Absolute total nonsense. Because the moment I started focusing in, the moment I had this conversation with myself where I said, hang on, there's a minority, there's a very small number of people that are actually selling now. Surely, if I could connect with enough of those directly without disturbing any of the people that aren't, and as long as when I open my mouth, the right words fall out, I'm going to list as many properties as I might need to list. And if I go at that with the idea, because I fully understood that there was a surplus of opportunities out there, and I don't need them all, they don't maybe want to necessarily list with me either, it had to make perfect sense. So the admission of being lazy was something I dealt with because I still had aspirations. And I'm sure you do if you're listening to this now. And I stopped worrying about what people told me was possible. I stopped listening to what I believe are excuses that are manufactured by people that are seeking to justify their disposition. There's a famous saying from General George Patton, who is coincidentally is one of my heroes. His ability to articulate those things around leadership that make perfect sense, to me, were just a complete inspiration. One of the things George would say, he'd say, be very cautious, be very wary of the reports that come from the walking wounded, meaning, of course, those soldiers that are returning from the front that have been injured up on the main line at the front of the battle. He said, be very careful. He said, don't take counsel. He said, the reality is the reports from the walking wounded. He said, the walking wounded will seek to justify their disposition by painting alarming pictures of the enemy. What he was more or less saying is, don't listen to the people that have been shot. They'll try and tell you it's worse up there than it actually is. And I think this is the same inside the real estate space right now. There are sellers there. Those sellers are always there. If they come into contact with the salesperson who completely understands what the message that they're trying to convey across to those sellers, then we're good to go. I'll talk about frustration points. I know that this might be a little bit in the context of where you're sitting as a salesperson, but if you identify the opportunity and that seller turns around and says to you, they want to find something to buy before they sell. Well, the fact that it's not there, that just doesn't make any sense. I look at that and I go, well, if they could find something today, they would want to sell, and they don't only want to sell, they would want to sell hastily. And in fact, that would put them in a pressured or an anxious position, because now they've found something, they just want this other end done. And we know to get that done in the best possible light, to determine the best possible result, requires time. So what's required are good selling skills, good advice that is premised around the safest and most practical way for them to go about it. Now, we talked about this last week, and this made perfect sense. So now I want to talk about your routine and how you avoid the notion of allowing other things to get in the way of your procurement of active property sellers. First and foremost, I just want you to understand that depending upon where you come into touch with these sellers, it's not going to necessarily happen today. So I believe a result today is the result of being prepared the day before. So do not confuse laziness with apathy, because my admission about being apathetic, where did I get that? My admission about being lazy, was not founded on apathy. It was just that I was not given over to unnecessary exertion. I couldn't abide the idea of having to expend a whole lot of effort and toil to get a minimum result. I said, well, how do I speak to all the people at once? How do I directly connect with the sellers, knowing that there's less of those than there are people that are actually going to be selling? I started to think, about how I reverse engineered that process. I said, what do active property sellers do? How do they behave? What will make them react? And I started to look at all the things that appeal to a lazy person, not least of which was marketing. I understood that if I could create a perception, that for many that would become their reality. And if that perception was enough to attract them in, then everything would make sense. So when we talk about routine, for example, I see so often that many of you who have been doing this for some time, you fight so hard to create that presence in your marketplace. You're not necessarily getting the feel or result that you want, or you get a distraction of finding a few listings and you get involved with those, and you forget to tend to the maintenance and the continued preservation of that presence in the marketplace. So this all needs to be formulated into routine behavior and how you go about that routine. So for me, everything's about premeditated behavior and making sure that you run the prioritization around those components. So when I think about my weekly routine, I like to break it up in a Monday through Sunday type environment. Now, I get it that of those 7 days, you might be choosing to work 6 of those. If you're at the infancy of your career, I will be forgiving around that, because for what you don't know or don't know how to do, in some ways you have to compensate for that by putting in a few more hours or maybe even a whole day. But you don't want that to be prolonged. You want to make every day count. And to make every day count, that is achieved through understanding how you need to set up habitual routine behavior and how you want that to work. So I say that you're working in a couple of facets. You might be working as an individual. You're just starting out as a sales associate. You're trying to break an area, and you've got a sales team leader that's going to help you win some of those early presentations. Or you might be working in direct correlation, sitting on the back of or working with a sales professional right now, and your job is to find the opportunities to get that sales professional into them. As I've said, this can actually be enhanced by you pre-selling that professional on their behalf. You can do and say things that they can't necessarily do themselves, and this can create some surety around that. But we walk in on Mondays, manic Mondays. What do I hate about Mondays? Oh, there's not much. I mean, I'm just not a morning person, but I like to come in and I like to know exactly what I have to do. I love the idea of relying on routine. I love the idea of relying on a system. Let's look at the difference between the two. And I just spent a lot of time talking to a sales team leader about what I'm about exactly what I'm about to share with you here right now, in the context of reactive behavior versus proactive behavior. You see, if we rely on skill, the thing that underpins skill, and I hope you're writing this down, if you're reliant upon your skills to win business, and there is a component around that, but here's the problem with it. What underpins what drives skill? I'll tell you 2 things. The first is your confidence. What do I mean by that? Well, if you went out today and you found 5 active property sellers relatively quickly, when you go out tomorrow and you utilize that same prospecting method and you come across someone who's half-baked or maybe procrastinating a little bit, how's your behavior going to be around that? I reckon you can almost talk to someone who wasn't thinking you're selling at all because your confidence level's so high and convince them to come on the market. But if you go out and use a method and you get nothing but knockbacks for a week, I reckon by the 6th day you go out and do it, you're almost expecting to fail. So your level of confidence is the first thing that underpins your skill level and how those results are coming back to you. And secondly, and here's the human condition, one that I've struggled with for years. I'll share this with you just briefly. I've always said the least manageable resource in any enterprise is human beings, because human beings are unpredictable. They do and say things that you never know what's really coming. And the fascinating thing in this enterprise, in the business of real estate sales, it's the primary resource. So you can understand why I say to a lot of leaders, you've got to be a little bit cuckoo to even be engaged in this in the first place. So the second thing is how you feel. What do I mean by that? Well, I want you to imagine that you actually have to go out there and prospect. You've had a good night's sleep. You're jumping out of your skin. You're primed, and you confront a few issues. But because your energy's up, you're well rested, you're full of enthusiasm. Yeah. So problems just come off your back, and you're not negative about it. But I want you to imagine that you're going out to do the same job, and you're confronted with an issue from a prospective seller. And the night before, you were last seen at 4 a.m. dancing on a bar, swinging around on a chandelier with bottles of booze in your hand, carrying on like a pork chop. Last seen, 4 a.m. So you've woken up this morning, what feels like an axe in the back of your head. How are you going to be out there presenting your company and bringing things back? Not so good. So if you rely on skill, the results will fluctuate as does your level of confidence, and in direct proportion to how you feel at any given time. This is not a good This is not a good premise for you to be listing and selling property or prospecting for property. Now let's look at process. What underpins a process? What underpins habitual routine behavior? Well, you don't have to put too much thought in it. You don't have to worry too much about how you feel or your level of confidence, because routine behavior, if you like, a system or a process, relies on sequence of events and deadlines pertaining to them. This must be done by this time, this must be done by that time. And you can operate a system even if you do feel like shit, or even if your confidence level is down. So it is that I prefer to rely as a lazy person on efficient and proficient systematic behavior. So protocols that are built into routine behavior. How do I make that work? Well, very simply, what I do is I work on a routine that says on a Monday, I come in, and that Monday is all about preparation of what I have in front of me for results, for what I have in front of me for prospecting for that week. So I plan all of that prospecting today. So for example, if I'm working in tandem with the salesperson, we've got properties that are coming to the market that are now coming on that have been listed before, I then run the checklist of what we call the regenerative prospecting process. Do I need to put LA woman out, which is they just listed? When I'm out doing that, do I then look at, because I'm in, that's all traction mode. Then what day do I need to put the invitation? When's the first open for inspection on it? Am I going to attend that open for inspection? What do I need to do in preparation? If we had open for inspections over the last weekend, on Monday, I'm now getting all those details and preparing a list in preparation to be calling those owners and running what I call the assumptive close for open for inspection, welcome home follow-up. I get all that in place. From the week before when I was out there, did I notice competitors' signs go up? If so, I then prepare all of the PMBX, which is the just listed for competitors for sale boards that go up around that sign, and get those prepped up, ready to go. Am I in a week where I'm dropping the for sale card, which many of you talked about before, just to create presence? Am I doing a blanket drop to the whole area? If so, do I have enough of those cards ready to go? And maybe this afternoon I'm running my first drop, and that's equally divvied up into the days that I'm working this week. Or am I doing the monthly newsletter? Am I doing the market roundup? These are all the things that I'm doing, but I get everything prepped. So by 10 o'clock, I know exactly what I've got to do. Here's the system. Here's the things I've got to do to start dropping them. And then maybe that afternoon I have programmed in any active property seller calls that I need to make. Yep. Or do I have meetings going on? Preordain those in. They're usually Tuesday sales meetings. So all these things are planned. I just look at my week contextually, and I understand these are all the things that I'm doing. I treat the prospecting as though it is a literal appointment. I lock it in as block times, and I just go ahead and do it. Because if I don't, I run the danger of behaving reactively. Every day is different. Every day is a bit exciting. But if you don't know exactly what you're doing, then the results you get are pretty much the same. So then come that Monday's done, so I get that meeting, I get myself sorted out. If I got to listen in to actually other salespeople maybe following up on open for inspections, if I'm not doing it myself, I jump in and I'm running training in tandem with that. And then from there, I just move out and I start to deliver the stuff, run my calls in the afternoon, always seeking to get an appointment with an active property seller every day. Tuesday, I have, as I just said, for me, it would be the sales meeting in the morning. So that's half the day out. So I want to be prepared that straight after that, I'm back onto whatever deliveries have to take place, whether it's the PMBX, whether it's LA Woman, whether it's open welcome home invites, whatever it is. I jump out there and do it, running calls and then appoint. Wednesday or Thursday, so one of those days might be my day off. Yeah, one of each of them. I always say they're the best days to be taking off. One of the two, as a real estate agent. Again, deliveries, points, and training. So what I'm also doing is, if I've got drops and I'm taking stuff out or shoving things in letterboxes, I've got the headphones on and I'm also training. Why? Because I've always maintained the disposition that I'm training for the job I want, not the one I've got. I hope you write that down. Even right now, this week, I've been training for a job that I want. A higher elevation of what I've been doing thus far. Come Friday, I'm then running back into more preparation, basically for my welcome homes are going to take place on either Saturday or Sunday. I'm again listening in, and then come the Saturday or the Sunday, it's game day, and everything sort of comes into one big culmination. This habit, this routine takes 21 days to formulate. You got any problems with that? Just get in touch with me and jump onto the Property Careers 3M program, where we monitor, manage, and mentor you into habitual behavior so that you are firing on all 6 cylinders as a real estate sales professional. I hope that message meant a lot to you. Always understand what you focus on grows, and if you focus on creating habitual routine behavior, especially as it pertains to securing active property sellers, if you're focused on active property sellers, that's what you'll get. I always say this: whether you believe you can or you can't is what you get. So when people tell me that something's not possible, I look at them and say, I think you're right. They look at me and say, what do you mean? For you, you don't believe you can do it, and nor do I. I, however, believe I can, and for that reason, I'm going to do it. And this is born. You work back from there. Focus on what you want to get right and work it back from there. My name's Mark Dwyer. You can reach me at mark@propertycareers.com.au, or you can contact me at +61 410 592 165. Thanks for joining us, and I look forward to catching you on the next installment of Property Careers Prospector School Online.